All right, take two. T. Liggins, the life coach, here for another recap and discussion of the For Life episode series that's on ABC. For Life is a series that's showing that really highlights shines a light on this story of this guy, Aaron Wallace, from the episode, but it's inspired by the life of a guy named Isaac Wright Jr., who was wrongfully convicted to life in prison, became a prison rep through applying for passing the law bar exam in Virginia, and then applying for reciprocity in New York, and start litigating cases. So it's interesting each week that we're seeing these different types of cases, these different types of scenarios, what type of things go into convictions or plea deals and agreements. And it reminds me, it takes me back to my time in my studies in criminal justice. So I actually have a bachelor's in criminal justice from the University of South Dakota. And in getting that bachelor's degree, we had to take classes like criminal procedure and criminal law and try to get an understanding of how the courts work and the different things that play into that. And I really appreciate how this series really gives the common person an inside look of what's going on inside the courts, and what does it take to win a case? What does it take to argue a case? The different type of tones that are had in the courtroom, whether you're the defense attorney, whether you're the prosecuting attorney, whether you're the defendant, even as a defendant having the right to remain silent or not. There's so many things that just come into how do you litigate these cases. And so I thought it was really interesting, the dynamics that we saw today in the For Life episode series in that piece, in that way. A lot of different takeaways I've seen this week. The biggest one for me is family impact. And I continue to see through this episode, through this series, the impact on family. And interesting enough, just a couple of weeks ago, I was moderating a discussion here in Sioux Falls about the impact of incarceration on family and on workforce. And we got to get to the place as a community that we realize that incarceration does not only just impact the individual who's doing the time. There is a lot of emotional burden and financial burden and psychological burden that goes into filling the gap for that loved one that is now incarcerated, or trying to just emotionally support that loved one who is incarcerated. And this series is doing such a great job of showing what type of weight, is the wife carrying, the mother carrying, trying to be a good mom on the outside, trying to be a good partner on the inside, and some of the precarious situations that you can find yourself in, being that on the inside, surviving takes manipulation. It makes me very uncomfortable. I talked a little bit about that last week, about the necessity to manipulate in order to survive in prison, and how that's not helpful for individuals that once they release. The manipulation, not only that Aaron Wallace demonstrated when he, did what he did to get the piece of evidence, but even on the flip side of that, stepping outside of the inmate situation and really thinking about what's happening within our system, we saw the district attorney today really use manipulation when he sent, government workers to the workplace of Aaron Wallace's wife to remove her from the workplace, escort it, really show a strong sense for a presence of authority, and then brought her into his office whereby he really used language. If you really caught, he really used language that was leading, that was assumptive, and that happens often in the courts when people are looking at charges or looking at potential consequences. Oftentimes, the language that's being used is not anything of certainty. It is language that is assumptive. It is presumptive. It is stretching like the truth in a way to really evoke fear. And if you don't have the wherewithal to understand that they are using manipulation, they don't have enough evidence to actually convict. They may have the presumption of suspicion or reasonable suspicion to bring you in for questioning, but it's a whole nother burden of proof is actually what it's called. There's a whole nother burden of proof that's required for them to get convictions. And because the prosecution or the state or, just that side of the courts know that they don't have enough to convict, they use fear to get you to plead and take deals. Now, sometimes they overcharge you. You've seen in this episode, what Aaron Wallace was trying to demonstrate was that the individual was overcharged. He wasn't even charged with the proper crime based on this evidence and the circumstances of the case. But because of fear, because of his own incapacitation, they talked about the guy being not even able to really tie his own shoe. All these just really disturbing contributors to the conditions of what are going into these plea deals. And if they are not challenged, that which was really another big takeaway for me, is thinking about, the process of appeals and how, if you don't understand the process of appeals and how difficult it is to go through the process of appeals when you're convicted of a crime or you take a plea deal for whatever reason, if you don't ever bring these convictions back to the judge for appeal. And I remember, full disclosures, during my time away, the people spent a lot of time studying their cases, thinking about how can I appeal this? How can I fight this? And really having a sense of injustice. And it's hard to stomach, because you think that you just have people on the inside who are refusing to accept personal responsibility for their actions and for their behaviors. And sometimes maybe that is the case. Maybe they are still struggling with personal responsibility. But in some cases, and some is too many, there's actual injustice that has occurred. And people are on the inside doing more time than they ought to, doing time for crimes they didn't commit. And if these convictions don't ever make it back to appeal, then they never even have the opportunity to be made right. So got to really commend the efforts of, prison reps, people who go pro se, what it's called, where you represent yourself, or just organizations that are out there looking to advocate for inmates on the inside, because it's very difficult to navigate the appeals process on the inside. But so it's really cool to see it happening in this episode. But a lot of that is really, television magic, where it seems so much easier than what it is. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to go through some of that. I wanted to talk to, or bring up another thing that really stood out to me today. And it started with seeing Aaron make that phone call to the other police officer who he was kind of asking for his assistance. And when he went to that, he only had a couple minutes left on the call. And that really reminded me. It took me back to a time where, again, full disclosure, I had spent some time away myself about 4 years ago. And I recall the anguish and the sadness and the frustration of being on these monitored phone calls, these phone calls that cost money, and just feeling very, very constricted. Take a moment to think about that, to think about being limited to 15 minutes of telephone time in a day. or and understanding that telephone time is your connection to the outside world. That telephone time is your connection to your wife or to your children, but being limited. And not only are you limited in time for that occurrence, and you might be able to make another phone call. There's so many people in prison who need their phone calls, and you might be limited to just that one. You might be able to make another phone call, but it's not very likely. And those phone calls cost money. Do you know how much money is being made off the services being provided to individuals while they're away in prison? Do you know that there is a money game in this whole criminal justice system? So I was reminded of that, and I found myself looking into some research and thinking about, wondering how much money is truly being exchanged and made. So I went to this website called the Prison Policy Initiative, and on the website, it talks about following the money of mass incarceration. And I'm not a numbers guy. I'm so much more into just human interaction and dignity and esteem. But as I look to be more informed for reform, I find myself going down different pathways that I usually don't. And numbers is one of them. And what I found on the Prison Policy Initiative website, it says taxpayers and incarcerated people and their families pay $85 billion a year on public and private corrections, bails, and prison services. $85 billion taxpayers, incarcerated people, and their families pay public and private corrections, bail, and prison services. I then went to the website and further went in and it started outlining other things that are being generated for money in the prison, like medical services, transportation services, toiletries, food services. There is so much contracting that is going between Department of Corrections and private businesses that really makes an incentive for having people in prison and jail. We haven't had the conversation about prison labor yet and how much money is being made off prison labor and the cost savings that different companies experience from contracting with our Department of Corrections for prison labor. But one of those areas that I found was a little startling was for food as well. There was some notes on that website that talked about a company, and I won't name the company, was awarded $145 million for their food contract with that Department of Corrections in that state. And then that contract was terminated because there was complaints of meal shortages, maggots in the kitchen, and just outright not providing good services after getting a contract for $145 million. So they fired that company and then rehired a different company for $158 million a year to provide the food for the prisoners. And so there's these incentives for private businesses to engage with our Department of Corrections to provide services to inmates. And these inmates don't have the resources to afford these things themselves. So again, that financial burden then falls right back on to family. And so I just find it very disturbing when I think about how much money is truly being generated. Actually, when you add up all of the different ways that incarceration, criminal justice system has with money, when you come up probation and all the way down through, it ended up being $182 billion is what's really the number and the figure that has to do with incarceration. So I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that, and I'm going to continue to wrap my mind around that. I talked about the manipulation and the bullying that Aaron Wallace's wife experienced when she was in the DA's office, and how that sentiment, how that tone drives a lot of individuals, poor individuals at that, who can't afford representation, to really get an understanding of what are the burdens of proof, what is the different different ways to fight this or defend myself. I thought it was very interesting. Again, it reminded me of my studies where Aaron Wallace came back for a second time on that case, but even though he got new evidence, he got that judge all the way to the point where it came down to the judge's discretion. And even when it came down to the judge's discretion, that judge was uncomfortable with using their discretion, sided with law instead of like humanity or something, and said, I'm not going that route. You've worked hard. You've got new evidence. You came back a second time. It really seems like these things don't add up. But, now we're in this vague area. And do you have a precedent to cite this differentiation between private place and public place? And it's just so tricky. It's so tricky and so complex and so many layers to proving your innocence that you got more people taking plea deals and being convicted of guilt because they can't afford adequate defense, and the law is just so complex with precedents and states and case laws, and it's just difficult. And I just think I really can appreciate that this series continues to highlight that and can get us to think about what services are missing. Where is the gap, and how can we advocate for more support in these places that we wouldn't have people being over sentenced and convicted of crimes that they didn't commit, or at least, or are we holding these individuals accountable who are acting unethically and using their power and their authority in an unjust way? We need to have conversations around that. What type of accountabilities are out there for our district attorneys, our state's attorneys, our judges, our public defenders, our law enforcement officers? What type of oversight, what type of accountability are those who enforce the law above the law? That's the question. Are those who enforce the law above the law? That's really is the question. And if they are not above the law, if they are just as equal as we are under law, then what accountabilities are in place to ensure that? So I talked about family impact. I've talked about manipulation. I've talked a little bit about the following the money from the prison policy initiative deal. Prison policy initiative website. The complexities of the court system as well. Aaron Wallace says something that moves me too. In the end there, he says, well, one of the guys goes, man, the system is broken. And then he goes, no, it's working the way it's supposed to. And I remember being shook by that about 6 months ago. There's some really cool documentaries out there that also speak to some of the challenges in our criminal justice system. One being the 13th Amendment. Another one being When They See Us. Definitely recommend you check out both those documentaries. Done by a documentarist named Ava DeVru. I'm probably going to slaughter her last name, but the documentary is called The 13th. But she said the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do as well. Cory Booker might have said that too. And just the reformers, they're understanding, they're speaking out to say that the system is not broken, that it's actually doing what it's designed to do. And that's a hard pill to swallow. It really is, because in so many ways, it's causing more harm than good. People are leaving prison bitter, not better. Families are being broken up. Kids are growing up without supervision and going astray and all these different type of things. And it's just hard to imagine that the system was designed to destroy families or to hurt families or to cause all this pain and hurt. I really hope that we can do better and that we can start to move towards a system that is more restorative, a system that cares more about healing, a system that provides more education, more healing, more opportunities for preparation for true reentry into community. The last thing I'm going to talk about is how I think I said last time with the last live I did that inmates are the most There's some smart, innovative, intuitive individuals, and you can see just by this show how one step ahead Aaron Wallace has to be in all these situations, how he has to play chess with this situation and not checkers, all the way to the warden where she was ready to hold him accountable for some things that he did that was unethical, but he feels completely justified, because of the law of reciprocity and how the other side is playing dirty too, that he was ready to go even with the warden and had a carrot to wave in front of her to say, I got some intel for you that you wouldn't consequence me for blurring the line a little bit. The manipulation makes me nervous. I don't like it. I'm in full recovery from manipulation and some other different things I used to struggle with. I like to shoot it straight. I don't like all this wiggle room stuff, but it just really does shine a light into what type of things are happening on the inside of the prison, culture-wise, how you got to survive, and how you always got to stay one step ahead. Man, if we can just take that ingenuity and take that ability upon their reentry and apply to business practice and principles and workforce, well, we can really build a lot of positive contributors to our communities because, as you can see, they're people, they're humans, they're talented, they got skills. So, I said last thing, but one more thing. When he got his prison file, there was a sliver of hope that he got from his wife, from the police officer actually helping him on good moral move. His brother didn't win the case, but his morality was truly convicted by Aaron Wallace when he said, come on, man, like, help me. Help me. I'm helping you. I'm helping him. Let's help each other. And it's disturbing to see how sometimes we struggle with that doing the right thing morally because of our own, what we have to lose, which is justifiable. Yeah, you got to protect your own family, your own job. But there is a moral good. And it was really heartwarming to see that the law enforcement officer, the African-American law enforcement officer, decided to do a moral good and took photocopies of that dealio. And now he has hope. And that's what keeps inmates going on the inside. It is hope. A sliver of hope, it just gives them this life and this purpose on the inside. And it can be sad to realize how so little can do so much, but it's also inspiring and opportunity to realize that so little can do so much. So we got to ask ourselves, what are we doing to provide hope? What are we doing to create hope and opportunities for people on the inside that they would be able to believe in a day outside of prison that they get back in community and contribute? So I think it's about 10:30 now. I kind of lose track of time. I'm looking over here. I see I'm pretty close. Thank you for all that have joined in today. I had a technical difficulty earlier. I think this is the second time through. I'm not really seeing who's all been joining. I've seen some people come in and out, but I just want to say thank to those who did come in. You can look for myself, maybe some team members, maybe some guests along the way as we do recaps and discussions around this series for life. I'm going to start collecting questions and stuff too, get this thing figured out. Maybe we can do some engagement. But for now, next week, check out the next episode, week 4. We'll be right back here at Heart of Life, talking about education, talking about reform measures, trying to encourage each other to connect in this way. And I would say here, if you're in Sioux Falls, definitely check out what's going on with Heart of Life. I had a busy week this week of reform, education, and different things. I got some live stuff on my Facebook page. So reach out to me if you think there's opportunities to really continue to raise the conversation around education on criminal justice reform and supporting vulnerable adults and our at-risk youth. You guys just let me know. I would love to come out and educate your group, your people, or do an event with you. I'm out. Heart of Life.